Major General Franklin Henniker didn't appear for supper. He telephoned and insisted on talking to me and to no one else. He told me that he was keeping a vigil by Papa's bed, that Papa was dying in great pain. Frank sounded scared and lonely. Look, I said, why don't I go back to my hotel and you and I can get together later when this crisis is over? No. You stay right there. I want you to be where I can get hold of you right away. He was panicky about my slipping out of his grasp. Since I couldn't account for his interest in me, I begged to feel panic too. Could you give me some idea what you want to see me about, I asked. Not over the phone. Something about your father? Something about you. Something I've done? Something you're going to do. I heard a chicken clucking in the background of Frank's end of the line. I heard a door open and xylophone music came from some chamber. The music was again when day is done, and then the door was closed and I couldn't hear the music anymore. I'd appreciate it if you'd give me some small hint of what you expect me to do, so I can sort of get set, I said. Zamekabo. What? It's a Buchananist word. I don't know any Buchananist words. Julian Castle's there. Yes, ask him, said Frank. I've got to go now. He hung up. So I asked Julian Castle what Zamakibo meant. You want a simple answer or a whole answer? Let's start with a simple one. Fate. Inevitable destiny. Cancer, said Julian Castle at dinner. When I told him that Papa was dying in pain. Cancer of what? Cancer of about everything. You say he collapsed on the reviewing stand today? He sure did, said Angela. That was the effect of drugs, Castle declared. He's at the point now where drugs and pain just about balance out. More drugs would kill him. I'd kill myself, I think, murmured Newt. He was sitting on a sort of folding high chair he took with him when he was visiting. It was made of aluminum tubing and canvas. It beat sitting on a dictionary, an atlas, and a telephone book. He'd said when he erected it. That's what Corporal McCabe did, of course, said Castle. He named his major domo as his successor, then he shot himself. Cancer too, I asked. I can't be sure. I don't think so, though. Unrelieved villainy just wore him out, is my guess. That was all before my time. This certainly is a cheerful conversation, said Angela. I think everybody would agree that these are cheerful times, said Castle. Well, I said to him, I'd think you would have more reasons for being cheerful than most, doing what you are doing with your life. I once had a yacht, too, you know. I don't follow you. Having a yacht is a reason for being more cheerful than most, too. If you aren't Papa's doctor, I said, who is? One of my staff, a Dr. Schlichter von Koningswald. A German? Vaguely, he was in the SS for 14 years. He was a camp physician at Auschwitz for 6 of those years. Doing penance at the House of Hope and Mercy, is he? Yes, said Castle, and making great strides, too, saving lives right and left. Good for him. Yes, if he keeps going at his present rate, working night and day, the number of people he saved will equal the number of people he let die in the year 3010. So there's another member of my chorus, Dr. Schlichter von Koningswald. 3 hours after supper, Frank still hadn't come home. Julian Castle excused himself and went back to the House of Hope and Mercy in the jungle. Angela, Newt, and I sat on the cantilevered terrace. The lights of Bolivar were lovely below us. There was a great illuminated cross on top of the administration building of Manzano Airport. It was motor-driven, turning slowly, boxing the compass with electric piety. There were other bright places on the island, too, to the north of us. Mountains prevented our seeing them directly, but we could see in the sky their balloons of light. I asked Stanley, Frank Henniker's major domo, to identify for me the sources of the auroras. He pointed them out counterclockwise. House of Hope and Mercy in the jungle. Papa's Place and Fort Jesus. Fort Jesus? The training camp for our soldiers. It's named after Jesus Christ. Sure, why not? There was a new balloon of light growing quickly to the north. Before I could ask what it was, it relieved itself as headlights topping a ridge. The headlights were coming toward us. They belonged to a convoy. The convoy was composed of 5 American-made army trucks. Machine gunners manned ring mounts on the top of the cabs. The convoy stopped in Frank's driveway. Soldiers dismounted at once. They set to work on the grounds, digging foxholes and machine gun pits. I went out with Frank's major domo to ask the officer in charge what was going on. We have been ordered to protect the next president of San Lorenzo, said the officer in island dialect. He isn't here now, I informed him. I don't know anything about it, he said. My orders are to dig in here, that's all I know. I told Angela and Newt about it. Do you think there's any real danger? Angela asked me. I'm a stranger here myself, I said. At that moment, there was a power failure. Every electric light in San Lorenzo went out. Frank's servants brought us gasoline lanterns. I told us that power failures were common in San Lorenzo, that there was no cause for alarm. I found that disquiet was hard for me to set aside, however, since Frank had spoken of my zamakibo. He had made me feel as though my own free will were as irrelevant as the free will of a piggy wig arriving at the Chicago stockyards. I remembered again the stone angel in Ilium, and I listened to the soldiers outside to their clinking, chunking, murmuring labors. I was able to concentrate on the conversation of Angela and Newt. Though they got into a fairly interesting subject, they told me that their father had had an identical twin. They had never met him. His name was Rudolph. The last they had heard of him, he was a music box manufacturer in Zurich, Switzerland. Father hardly ever mentioned him, said Angela. Father hardly ever mentioned anybody, Newt declared. There was a sister of the old man, too, they told me. Her name was Celia. She raised giant schnauzers on Shelter Island, New York. She always sends a Christmas card, said Angela, with a picture of a giant schnauzer on it, said little Newt. It sure is funny how different people and different families turn out, Angela observed. That's very true and well said, I agreed. I excused myself from the glittering company and I asked Stanley, the major domo, if there happened to be a copy of the books of Bakonin about the house. Stanley pretended not to know what I was talking about, and then he grumbled that the books of Bakonin were filth, and then he insisted that anyone who read them should die on the hook, and then he brought me a copy from Frank's bedside table. It was a heavy thing, about the size of an unabridged dictionary. It was written by hand. I trundled it off to my bedroom to my slab of rubber on living rock. There was no index, so my search for the implications of zamakibo was difficult, was in fact fruitless that night. I learned some things, but they were scarcely helpful. I learned of the Bakoninist cosmogony, for instance, wherein Barasisi the sun held Pabu, the moon, in his arms, and hoped that Pabu would bear him a fiery child. But poor Pabu gave birth to children that were cold, that did not burn, and Borasisi threw them away in disgust. These were the planets who circled their terrible father at a safe distance. Then poor Pabu herself was cast away, and she went to live with her favorite child, which was Earth. Earth was Pabu's favorite because it had people on it, and the people looked up at her and loved her and sympathized. And what opinion did Bakonin hold of his own cosmogony? Foma, lies, he wrote, a pack of Foma. It's hard to believe that I slept at all, but I must have, for otherwise how could I have found myself awakened by a series of bangs and a flood of light? I rose out of bed at the first bang and ran to the heart of the house in the brainless ecstasy of a volunteer fireman. I found myself rushing headlong at Newt and Angela, who were fleeing from beds of their own. We all stopped short, sheepishly analyzing the nightmarish sounds around us, sorting them out as coming from a radio, from an electric dishwasher, from a pump, all restored to noisy life by the return of electric power. The three of us awakened enough to realize that there was humor in our situation, that we had reacted in amusingly human ways to a situation that seemed mortal but wasn't. And to demonstrate my mastery over my illusory fate, I turned the radio off. We all chuckled, and we all vied in saving face to be the greatest student of human nature, the person with the quickest sense of humor. Newt was the quickest. He pointed out to me that I had my passport and my billfold and my wristwatch in my hands. I had no idea what I'd grabbed in the face of death, didn't know I'd grabbed anything. I countered hilariously by asking Angela and Newt why it was they both carried little thermos jugs, identical red and gray jugs, capable of holding about 3 cups of coffee. It was news to them both that they were carrying such jugs. They were shocked to find them in their hands. They were spared making an explanation by more banging outside. I was bound to find out what the banging was right away, and with a brazenness as unjustified as my earlier panic, I investigated. Found Frank Henniker outside, tinkering with a motor generator set mounted on a truck. The generator was the new source of our electricity. The gasoline motor that drove it was backfiring and smoking. Frank was trying to fix it. He had the heavenly Mona with him. She was watching him, as always, gravely. Boy, have I got news for you, he yelled at me, and he led the way back into the house. Angela and Newt were still in the living room, but somehow, somewhere, they had managed to get rid of their peculiar thermos jugs. The contents of those jugs, of course, were parts of the legacies from Dr. Felix Henniker, were parts of the wampeter of my Keris, were chips of Ice 9. Frank took me aside. How awake are you? As awake as I ever was. I hope you're really wide awake, because we've got to have a talk right now. Start talking. Let's get some privacy. Frank told Mona to make herself comfortable. We'll call you if we need you. I looked at Mona meltingly, and I thought that I had never needed anyone as much as I needed her. About this Franklin Henniker, the pinch-faced child spoke with the timbre and conviction of a kazoo. I had heard it said in the army that such and such a man spoke like a man with a paper rectum. Such a man was General Henniker. Poor Frank had had almost no experience in talking to anyone, having spent a furtive childhood as Secret Agent X9. Now, hoping to be hearty and persuasive, he said tinny things to me, things like, I like the cut of your jib, and I want to talk cold turkey to you, man to man. And he took me down to what he called his den in order that we might call a spade and let the chips fall where they may. So we went down steps cut into a cliff and into a natural cave that was beneath and behind the waterfall. There were a couple of drawing tables down there. Three pale, bare-boned Scandinavian chairs, a bookcase containing books on architecture, books in German, French, Finnish, Italian, English. All was lit by electric lights that pulsed with the panting of the motor generator set. And the most striking thing about the cave was that there were pictures painted on the walls, painted with kindergarten boldness, painted with the flat clay earth and charcoal colors of very early man. I did not have to ask Frank how old the cave paintings were. I was able to date them by their subject. The paintings were not of mammoths or saber-toothed tigers or ithophalic cave bears. The paintings treated endlessly the aspects of Mona Ammons Manzano as a little girl. This is where Mona's father worked, I asked. That's right. He was the Finn who designed the House of Hope and Mercy in the jungle. I know. That isn't what I brought you down here to talk about. This is something about your father. This is about you. Frank put his hand on my shoulder and he looked me in the eye. The effect was dismaying. Frank meant to inspire camaraderie, but his head looked to me like a bizarre little owl blinded by light and perched on a tall white post. Maybe you'd better come to the point. There's no sense in beating around the bush, he said. I'm a pretty good judge of character, if I do say so myself, and I like the cut of your jib. Thank you. I think you and I could really hit it off. I have no doubt of it. We've both got things that mesh. I was grateful when he took his hands from my shoulder. He meshed the fingers of his hands like great teeth. One hand represented him, I suppose, and the other represented me. We need each other. He wiggled his fingers to show me how gears work. I was silent for some time, though outwardly friendly. You get my meaning? Asked Frank at last. You and I were going to do something together? That's right. Frank clapped his hands. You're a worldly person used to meeting the public, and I'm a technical person used to working behind the scenes, making things go. How can you possibly know what kind of a person I am? We've just met. Your clothes, the way you talk. He put his hand on my shoulder again. I like the cut of your jib. So you said. Frank was frantic for me to complete his thought, to do it enthusiastically, but I was still at sea. Am I to understand that you are offering me some kind of job here in San Lorenzo? He clapped his hands. He was delighted. That's right. What would you say to $100,000 a year? Good God, I cried. What would I have to do for that? Practically nothing, and you drink out of gold goblets every night and eat off of gold plates and have a palace all your own? What's the job? President of the Republic of San Lorenzo. Me? President? I gasped. Who else is there? Nuts. Don't say no until you've really thought about it. Frank watched me anxiously. No. You haven't really thought about it. Enough to know it's crazy. Frank made his fingers into gears again. We'd work together. I'd be backing you up all the time. Good. So if I got plugged from the front, you'd get it too. Plugged. Shot. Assassinated. Frank was mystified. Why would anybody shoot you? so you get to the president. Frank shook his head. Nobody in San Lorenzo wants to be president. He promised me. It's against their religion. It's against your religion, too? I thought you were going to be the next president. Aye, he said, and found it hard to go on. He looked haunted. You what? I asked. He faced the sheet of water that curtained the cave. Maturity, the way I understand it, he told me, is knowing what your limitations are. He wasn't far from Bakonin in defining maturity. Maturity, Bakonin tells us, is a bitter disappointment for which no remedy exists, unless laughter can be said to remedy anything. I know I've got limitations, Frank continued. They're the same limitations my father had. Oh? I've got a lot of very good ideas, just the way my father did. Frank told me in the waterfall, but he was no good at facing the public, and neither am I. You'll take the job? Frank inquired anxiously. No, I told him. Do you know anybody who might want the job? Frank was giving a classic illustration of what Bakonin calls duffel. Duffel, in the Bakoninist sense, is the destiny of thousands upon thousands of persons when placed in the hands of a stupa. A stupa is a frog-bound child. I laughed. Something's funny? Pay no attention when I laugh, I begged him. I'm a notorious pervert in that respect. Are you laughing at me? I shook my head. No. Word of honor? Word of honor. People used to make fun of me all the time. You must have imagined that. They used to yell at things at me. I didn't imagine that. People are unkind sometimes without meaning to be, I suggested. I wouldn't have given him all my word of honor on that. You know what they used to yell at me? No. They used to yell at me, "Hey, X9, where are you going?" That doesn't seem too bad. That's what they used to call me, said Frank in sulky reminiscence. Secret Agent X9. I didn't tell him I knew that already. Where are you going, X9? Frank echoed again. I imagined that what the taunters had been like. Imagined where fate had eventually goosed and chivied them to. The wits who had yelled at Frank were surely nicely settled in death-like jobs at General Forge and Foundry, at Ilium Power and Light, at the telephone company. And here, by God, was Secret Agent X9, a major general, offering to make me king, in a cave that was curtained by a tropical waterfall. They really would have been surprised if I'd stopped and told them where I was going. You mean you had some premonition you'd end up here? It was a Bakoninist question. I was going to Jack's hobby shop, he said, with no sense of anticlimax. Oh, they all knew I was going there, but they didn't know what really went on there. They would have been really surprised, especially the girls, if they'd found out what really went on. The girls didn't think I knew anything about girls. What really went on? I was screwing Jack's wife every day. That's how come I fell asleep all the time in high school. That's how come I never achieved my full potential. He roused himself from this sordid recollection. Come on, be president of San Lorenzo. You'd be real good at it with your personality, please. And the time of night, and the cave and the waterfall, and the Stone Angel and Ilium, and 250,000 cigarettes, and 3,000 quarts of booze, and 2 wives, and no wife, and no love waiting for me anywhere, and the listless life of an ink-stained hack, and Pabu, the moon, and the Borasisi, the sun, and their children. All things conspired to form one cosmic vindit, one mighty shove into Bakononism, into the belief that God was running my life, and that he had work for me to do. And inwardly, I saruned, which is to say that I acquiesced to the seeming demands of my vindit. Inwardly, I agreed to become the next president of San Lorenzo. Outwardly, I was still guarded, suspicious. There must be a catch, I hedged. There isn't. There'll be an election. There never has been. We'll just announce who the new president is, and nobody will object. Nobody objects to anything. They aren't interested. They don't care. There has to be a catch. There's kind of one, Frank admitted. I knew it. I began to shrink for my vindit. What is it? What's the catch? Well, it isn't really a catch because you don't have to do it if you don't want to. It would be a good idea, though. Let's hear this great idea. Well, if you're going to be president, I think you really ought to marry Mona, but you don't have to. If you don't want to, you're the boss. She would have me? If she'd have me, she'd have you. All you have to do is ask her. Why should she say yes? It's predicted in the books of Bakonin that she'll marry the next president of San Lorenzo, said Frank. Frank brought Mona to her father's cave and left us alone. We had difficulty in speaking at first. I was shy. Her grown Her gown was diaphanous. Her gown was azure. It was a simple gown caught lightly at the waist by a gossamer thread. All else was shaped by Mona herself. Her breasts were like pomegranates or what you will, but like nothing so much as a young woman's breasts. Her feet were all but bare. Her toenails were exquisitely manicured. Her scanty sandals were gold. How do you do? I asked. My heart was pounding. Blood boiled in my ears. It is not possible to make a mistake, she assured me. I did not know that this was a customary greeting given by all Baconinists when meeting a shy person, so I responded with a feverish discussion of whether it was possible to make a mistake or not. My God, you have no idea how many mistakes I've already made. You're looking at the world's champion mistake maker, I blurted, and so on. Do you have any idea what Frank just said to me? About me? About everything, but especially about you. He told you that you could have me if you wanted. Yes, that's true. Yes? I don't know what to say next. Bokamaru would help, she suggested. What? Take off your shoes, she commanded, and she removed her sandals with the utmost grace. I am a man of the world, having had, by reckoning I once made, more than 53 women. I can say that I have seen women undress themselves in every way that it can be done. I have watched the curtains part on every variation of the final act. And yet, the one woman who made me groan involuntarily did no more than remove her sandals. I tried to untie my shoes. No bridegroom ever did worse. I got one shoe off, but knotted the other one tight. I tore a thumbnail on the knot, finally ripped off the shoe without untying it. Then off came my socks. Mona was already sitting on the floor, her legs extended, her round arms thrust behind her for support, her head tilted back, her eyes closed. It was up to me now to complete my first, great God, Bokamaru. These are not Bakonin's words, they are mine. Sweet wraith, invisible mist of, I am, my soul, wraith lovesick over long, or long alone. Would another sweet soul meet? Long have I advised thee ill, as to where two souls might tryst. My soul, go there, sweet soul, be kissed. Do you find it easier to talk to me now? Mona inquired. As though I'd known you for 1,000 years, I confessed. I felt like crying. I love you, Mona. I love you, she said it simply. What a fool Frank was. Oh? To give you up. He did not love me. He was going to marry me only because Papa wanted him to. He loves another. Who? A woman he knew in Ilium. The lucky woman had to be the wife of the owner of Jack's hobby shop. He told you? Tonight, when he freed me to marry you. Mona? Yes. Is there anyone else in your life? She was puzzled. Many. She said at last. That you love? I love everyone. As much as me? Yes. She seemed to have no idea that this might bother me. I got off the floor, sat in a chair, and started putting my shoes and socks back on. I suppose you perform. You do what we just did with other people. Bokamaru? Bokamaru. Of course. I don't want you to do it with anybody but me from now on, I declared. Tears filled her eyes. She adored her promiscuity, was angered that I should try to make her feel shame. I make people happy. Love is good, not bad. As your husband, I want all your love for myself. She stared at me with widening eyes. A sin what? What was that? A sin what? She cried. A man who wants all of somebody's love. That's very bad. In the case of marriage, I think it's a very good thing. It's the only thing. She was still on the floor, and I, now with my shoes and socks back on, was standing. I felt very tall, though I'm not very tall, and I felt very strong, though I'm not very strong, and I was a respectful stranger to my own voice. My voice had a metallic authority that was new. As I went on talking in ball-peen tones, it dawned on me that what was happening already. I was already starting to rule. I told Mona that I had seen her performing a sort of vertical Bokamaru with a pilot on the reviewing stand shortly after my arrival. You are to have nothing more to do with him, I told her. What is his name? I don't even know, she whispered. She was looking down now. And what about young Philip Castle? You mean Bokamaru? I mean anything and everything. As I understand it, you two grew up together. Yes. Bakonin tutored you both? Yes. The recollection made her radiant again. I suppose there was plenty of Bokamaruing in those days. Oh, yes, she said happily. You aren't to see him anymore either. Is that clear? No. No? I will not marry a Sinwat. She stood. Goodbye. Goodbye. I was crushed. But Conan tells us it is very wrong not to love everyone exactly the same. What does your religion say? I don't have one. I do. I had stopped ruling. I see you do, I said. Goodbye, man with no religion. She went to the stone staircase. Mona. She stopped. Yes? Could I have your religion if I wanted it? Of course. I want it. Good. I love you. And I love you, I sighed. So I became betrothed at dawn to the most beautiful woman in the world, and I agreed to become the next president of San Lorenzo. Papa wasn't dead yet, and it was Frank's feeling that I should get Papa's blessing if possible. So as Borosisi, the sun came up, Frank and I drove to Papa's castle in a jeep we commandeered from the troops guarding the next president. Mona stayed at Frank's. I kissed her sacredly, and she went to sacred sleep. Over the mountains, Frank and I went, through groves of wild coffee trees with the flamboyant sunrise on our right. It was in the sunrise that the Cetacean majesty of the highest mountain on the island of Mount McCabe made itself known to me. It was a fearful hump, a blue whale with one queer stone plug on its back for a peak and scale with a whale. The plug might have been the stump of a snapped harpoon. And it seemed so unrelated to the rest of the mountain that I asked Frank if it had been built by men. He told me that it was a natural formation. Moreover, he declared that no man, as far as he knew, had ever been to the top of Mount McCabe. It doesn't look very tough to climb, I commented, save for the plug at the top. The mountain presented inclines no more forbidding than courthouse steps, and the plug itself from a distance at any rate seemed conveniently laced with ramps and ledges. Is it sacred or something? I asked. Maybe it was once, but not since Bakonin. Then why hasn't anybody climbed it? Nobody's felt like it yet. Maybe I'll climb it. Go ahead, nobody's stopping you. We rode in silence. What is sacred to Bakoninists? I asked after a while. Not even God, as near as I can tell. Nothing? Just one thing. I made some guesses. The ocean? The sun? Man, said Frank. That's all. Just man.